afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call to order the Public Works Committee meeting for May 10th, 2016. First order of business is roll call and determination of quorum. Brenda, please.
Doyle.
Here.
Estes. Roberts. Weifenbach. Wright. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Brenda. Next order of business is to adopt the agenda. Do I have any additions or changes? Mr. Weifenbach.
Madam Chair, I'd like to add a request from Bill Freitag to waive warp on Dias Avenue.
Okay, are there any objections? We'll call that item number 16.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sorry, I have no, my monitor is wigging out here. Okay, we'll just do this old school. Mr. Estes, please.
Are we then removing 14, or are we just going, or do you just want to change the title of 14? Are we gonna discuss it and then?
Mr. Weifenbach?
We'll leave 14 on.
Okay, so we'll just add an item number 16 from Bill Freitag, waive the warp on Dias Avenue.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Perfect. All right, any further changes? Take a motion to adopt the agenda, please, as amended.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Weifenbach. I have a motion to adopt the agenda as amended. A second from Mr. Roberts. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. The agenda's been adopted. Thank you. Now's the time for general public comment, which is the time for members of the public to discuss or express concerns to the committee on any issue not limited to items on the agenda. Action, however, will not be taken at the meeting on any issue not on the agenda except by placement thereon by unanimous vote of the aldermen present. I have no general public speaker forms, so we'll go ahead and move on to consent items 1 through 11. I'll open public comment on items 1 through 11. Seeing no speakers or arms waving, I will go ahead and close public comment items 1 through 11. Would any committee person like to remove any item 1 through 11 for separate consideration? Mr. Weifenbach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item number 11.
Anyone else? I take a motion to adopt the balance.
So moved.
A motion by Estes to adopt the balance of the consent calendar, items 1 through 11 with the exception of 11, and a second by Roberts. Thank you very much. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? All those opposed, same sign. Consent calendar is adopted with the exception of item number 11. Item number 11 will move on, which is the deny vacation of right-of-way on Nichols subdivision. Open the floor for comment or questions. Mr. Wright.
Thank you, Chair. I had a couple of questions that I sent in to Dale, and the intent, I think, of denying this is that there's a potential East Mead would be extended. Is that a reality with the channel there and all that? Is it desirable?
Mr. Tech, if you would, I know several questions came up in agenda review on this item as well.
Yeah, and Jerry, I did receive your questions earlier. I haven't even had a chance to look at them, but to address your question directly, most recently, Black Hills Power, I believe, did some work down there. They extended Mead Street at least to the extent of their property. Certainly, if any adjoining property were to further subdivide, I believe there's a fairly significant larger parcel. It would make sense to extend the roadway to provide adequate street to that parcel. So to speculate as to whether or not it's realistic or not, certainly it's realistic. Is it going to happen in the next 3-4 years? It's hard to say.
Well, I thank you. I'd sent about 7 questions to Dale I'd like to have discussed probably on Monday night, if that's appropriate, so he has a chance to absorb and we can discuss them then. And I sent copies to you, the Chair, and to Ron, and to Richie. Is that all right with you, Dale? Thank you. I make a motion that we continue this till Monday night.
You've already spoken. Maybe one of your colleagues might do that, or jump back in the queue. Mr. Wright, thank you. Mr. Reifenbach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd make a motion either to continue or to
move to council without recommendation.
Send without recommendation.
Is that your motion?
That'd be my motion.
Do I have a second? I have a second by Wright, and the motion was made by Weifenbach to continue this item number 11 to council without recommendation. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Item number 11 is ruled to council without recommendation. We're now on 9 non-consent items, 12 through 15. I'll open public comment. Ms. Hanson, if you'd like to wait, I'll just let you speak on your item since it's a short non-consent calendar, if you're okay with that? Sure. Okay, I'll call you up then if you hang on for a second. Seeing no other speaker request forms, we'll go ahead and close public comment and move to item number 12. Item number 12 is appeal of on-site wastewater disposal and treatment permit per ordinance 13.20 by Ted Chamber. Okay. Is there anything you would like to address, sir? If you'd like to, we're not going to be able to hear. If you'd like to approach the podium, you can take your pick on the microphones there to the left or to the right, and then just state your name and address for the record and let us know what it is you would like to let us know or see happen today.
I'm Ted Chamber. I live at 3300 Bennett Road. I was kind of surprised to get a letter that said they were concerned about polluting Rapid City's water with my septic tank. And actually, I thought it was ridiculous. I didn't think anybody would be that stupid compared to where I'm living. And essentially let it go. And then we got another letter. It said the same thing, essentially. And I thought, maybe you are that stupid. Does anybody up there have any expertise in water, hydrology? Apparently no. How about geology? Apparently no. I have a hard time believing you know what you're talking about. My place is located in Section 23. I visited with Jesse and inquired where is the closest intake or water collection point for the city. He had no idea. I don't believe any of you do. Water runs downhill, and any water intake from the Rapid City would be a higher elevation than it would be on mine. In my world, water does not run uphill, so there's no chance of any pollution getting into the city water. As far as soaking through, he claimed there's an aquifer down below. He had no idea how deep that is. And again, if the water would go, it's 1,500 feet or more of shale to go through. It's impossible for any amount of water that I would use would go through that amount of dirt and still go into that aquifer, and which is still would be lower than what the water comes from where your pumps are at. So, in my opinion, this is kind of ridiculous, the whole thing.
Duly noted. Any other comments, sir?
Well, I haven't. Well, the amount of water that I would use for the septic tank in 2 months, February and March, I have a pump and a well. I use 5 kilowatt hours to pump water in those 60 days. And I can't believe that would make any difference as far as runoff or whatever. The tank was installed when it was allowed to have 1 tank on 1 acre, and I've got more than 30 acres of where there's no water, no groundwater located, so that I don't see how any water could be running off and contaminating anywhere. I've never had a problem with it. So as far as I'm concerned, this is more or less harassment than anything else. That's the end of mine, unless you
Okay,
have
well,
questions.
if you would stand by, we'll just open up discussion on this item from the committee members and see where we can take it. Thank you, sir. So, since I have no one in the queue, if I may, because I think there is a common misconception that elected officials should be experts on every division within the city. Dale, if you could walk us through what would trigger Mr. Chamber getting this type of notice, where it's coming from, what ordinances we're upholding by doing that, and really what that process is, so we can kind of delineate where within the city this is coming from, because it's certainly not coming from up here. Thank you, if you would.
What Mr. Chamber is appealing is the septic ordinance, the city's jurisdiction in the 1 mile system outside of the city. You've had a number of appeals in this matter. Mr. Chamber has mentioned today that he doesn't believe that he's polluting the water of the city of Rapid City. I don't know if that's true or not. Certainly, I would expect that neighbors of his have wells in the area. This ordinance isn't just to protect the waters of the city of Rapid City, it's to protect all other private individuals if they have private wells from having inadequate septics adjacent to them.
And what's the trigger? Why did he get this letter? I mean, is it something that goes out every year? What's the?
Since the city has adopted the ordinance 5-6 years ago, it took a phased approach to sending letters to people in the 1 mile. Weren't going to do it all in 1 year. It's been slowly phased in, sending letters out steadily over the last 5-6 years, trying to get everybody that's in the 1 mile permitted.
Okay. Do you have any? I'll go to the city attorney, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's important to note that it's not just Rapid City's water. Pennington County has also recognized the risk and adopted a septic ordinance. So both Pennington County and Rapid City are trying to protect the sources of drinking water, including the aquifer. And Mr. Tech can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there was actually a study done of the water sources and that there was a high level of fecal matter, and that is partly what initiated the city and the county adopting the septic ordinance to make sure that we're protecting the water. The reason that obviously this gentleman received the letter from the city is that administratively we have divided up responsibility with the county, and we take enforcement and administration within 1 mile, within the city and within 1 mile. But even if we were not doing that, then again, he would still be under the county regulations, which are identical to the city regulations, and the $20 in the inspection would need to be paid to the county. So it's purely administrative, but again, it's not just that it's Rapid City's water, it's that it's Rapid City and Pennington County's water that we're trying to protect.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Mr. Weifenbach, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I have a question for Mr. Chamber. You do not live in the city, is that correct, Mr.?
That is exactly right. Box Elder actually is on my west side, their city limits.
Okay, thank you. So is that where the confusion is coming in? Is it because you got the letter from the city?
No, my concern is that water does not run uphill. So
Right.
anything east of me may be affected, but it's 1,000 feet before they get to any place where the water could soak into. I have my well down there, and I have no problem with the water.
You're right, Mr. Chamber. I don't think you're going to get an argument that we understand water doesn't run uphill. But we have taken on the 1 mile within the city for the county. That's the reason you got the letter from the city. So the county is really who they're protecting, the people downstream from you. Does that make more sense to you?
Not in my position. There's nobody within a half a mile of me.
Okay.
And that would be to the north.
Right.
And as far as south and east, it'd be more like
How about
a mile before there's any buildings of any kind.
Mr. Chamber, how would you feel if someone upstream from you was dumping their sewer, their septic, and maybe wasn't quite as responsible as you, and the septic was dropping into your water system. I think that's kind of the approach they're taking when they did this.
Well, I'm not
protecting.
doing that, so I'm really not concerned about anybody else until somebody comes in and perhaps develops it or whatever. That may change it, but until then, I don't see any reason to proceed here.
I have nothing else to say. Thank you.
Any other further discussion? Yes? Mr. Estes?
I'll make a motion to deny, and if I get a second, I'd like to keep. You know, we are, this is a joint effort between the county and the city, and we seem to have quite a few, I should say quite a few people that are in the mile that don't like the agreement, and this is an agreement between the governing body of the county and the city, and the people, if I understand right, may I ask Dale Tech a question?
May.
Mr. Tech, of course, we overlap with the county on the 3 mile range on quite a few things, platting being one, and the septic. Now, if we didn't do the 1 mile, Mr. Shamber would still have to do the same thing with the county, is that correct?
That's correct.
And their rules and regulations and their licensing and their inspection guidelines are the same as the city?
That's correct.
Do you know if the county uses the same procedure outside the 3 mile? Or septic tanks outside the 3 mile, not?
Yes, they use the same requirements countywide.
Okay. Well, I guess is all I will say is that the group of people that feel that they're paying Rapid City and they're being taxed without representation, they should go to their public officials and have them come to us to change it. I mean, we're just upholding an agreement and administering an agreement we have with their elected officials. I yield.
Mr. Roberts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chambers, can I ask you just a couple of questions? One, what is the exact location? You said you were bordering Box Elder, north of I-90.
Do you know where Bennett Road is?
I should, but I don't. Sorry, sir.
I do. Do you know where, well, the Flying J?
Yes.
Okay, if you was a crow and flew to the northeast 1 mile, that's where I'm at.
Okay, okay. Did the Pennington County ever summon you about your septic?
We installed it by a licensed person and never heard a word since then.
How long ago was that?
Oh, that was about 2010, I think it was.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Tech, can I ask a question of Mr. Tech? Mr. Tech, my guess, by Mr. Chambers telling me where he's at, is we had recently some property annexed into the city up off of County Road. That could have thrown him into that, put him within the 1 mile limit? Or is there any, is he new into the 1 mile limit, or has he been in the 1 mile limit for a while?
I don't believe so. I believe he's been in the one mile limit for quite a while in that area up there. Certainly the county wouldn't have sent him any notice because they would have known that he was in the 1 mile and wouldn't have done that.
And it's a 5-year licensing period,
6
correct?
years.
6 years? So actually, Mr. Chambers, you're, even with the county, you would have just came due with the county. So like everyone up here, I think, has said so far, you know, it's unfortunate we're following the law. And no, I don't think we don't have a geologist or a hydrologist or, you know, unfortunately, we can't be an expert on everything. But we can be an expert on following ordinance and following the law. And that's what we need to do. And I'm sorry this has happened to you within the city, but if you were in the county, it would have happened to you there too. So anyway, thank you.
I'm sorry, my taxes go to pay your salary.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? All opposed, same sign. Motion to deny the appeal carries. Item number 13 is traffic on West Boulevard. I do have Ms. Allison Hanson here to address the council. Either microphone, and if you'd state your name and address for the record, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Allison Hanson, and I live at 1013 West Boulevard. I am here today to speak about the West Boulevard traffic issues that are happening due to the Mount Rushmore Road project. The West Boulevard homeowners have attended some meetings with the Mount Rushmore Road business owners, as well as we have met with Reedy Construction, who is the prime contractor on the job. On West Boulevard, the traffic has been extremely heavy at peak hours and throughout the day. In the morning and evening, at times it's backed up 8 blocks from St. Joe, bumper to bumper stop. And there are people using a high rate of speed on the boulevard as well. The intersections are already kind of inconsistently marked. The 4-way stops have no yields in the median, and the yield signs are in the median where there's no stop signs, which I think leads to some confusion for people, as well as the St. Patrick intersection, which, depending on which direction you're going, has some are stops, some are yields, some are no signs at all. People not familiar with these intersections have had a difficult time navigating them, but our biggest concern is the 7 to 9 blocks, depending on which side of the boulevard you count, between Franklin Street and Columbus, where there are no stop signs. In that area, the police has had speed signs that tell you the rate of speed that you're going, and people are frequently going through there at 35 miles an hour. It's not uncommon to see people going through there far too fast for a residential area. On the 1000 block, there's a curve in the road reducing visibility when you're crossing the street or turning out. And on that block, there is West Park, which is run by South Dakota Housing, and it has 80 apartments, which are rented to elderly and disabled people. Many of them have no cars and rely on walking or motorized wheelchairs to get to places like Safeway or wherever they need to go. So there's a lot of pedestrian traffic through there. And also we have Wilson School and the nursing school, which also there's a lot of pedestrian traffic from that. And I know when we had met with Reedy, they said, well, school's going to be out in a couple weeks, so we won't have as many kids crossing. But our neighborhood has a large volume of kids in general, and with them not being in school, it's of even greater concern when the kids are out playing and crossing the road. When we met with Reedy, I believe he's a subcontractor, the man that was there representing the people doing the signage. And what we were told was that the Mount Rushmore businesses do not want any traffic being diverted from Mount Rushmore Road. And they want to keep people on Mount Rushmore Road as much as they can, so they did not want to put up any signs encouraging a specific route. And we understand that and support that. And I guess our solution would be is if temporary stop signs could be put up in that 7 to 9 block area to slow down traffic and to then encourage people to use Mount Rushmore Road instead. And that would make it far safer for the residents and children of West Boulevard. And it would also help the businesses on Mount Rushmore Road, because then we believe if traffic was slowed down with more stop signs, that they would be encouraged to use Mount Rushmore Road instead. So I guess that's our concern.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll now open this item for discussion from the committee. Mr. Estes.
Thank you. May I ask Ms. Hanson a question?
Yes, please.
Ms. Hanson, this addition of stop signs, was this agreed upon or talked about amongst the entire West Boulevard Homeowners Association at their last meeting?
It was between a group of us that had met with Reedy. It's not the official West Boulevard Homeowners Association. It was just a solution we wanted to suggest, because that day at the Reedy meeting, they didn't have any solutions to how things could be slowed down or helped.
My recollection of of course, the last couple of West Boulevard meetings I've been to, it's been a while, but they're forecasting this, and my recollection, Dale, and you can, if Dale can help me, is that when this was discussed, that they didn't want to add, they didn't they were not in favor, of my understanding, of putting additional stop signs. I think they talked about putting it on every other street or whatever. And then, since I'm gonna ask Dale to talk, Dale, 5th Street and 9th Street should be done shortly, and I'm wondering if that should help ease some congestion on West Boulevard.
I think you're asking me a couple questions, and I'll try to work through them here as I understand them. Certainly, I attended a number of the West Boulevard Neighborhood Association meetings discussing traffic control in the neighborhood. The last meeting that I went to, they officially voted on whether or not they wanted temporary stop signs, and the vote was no, that they did not. As much as many people believe that putting up temporary stop signs to slow traffic down is a misconception. It's an unwarranted stop sign, and people that utilize that understand that once they utilize it, that there's no reason to stop here, so compliance is very, very low. So what you're doing is creating a non-compliance issue for those drivers when there's no reason for that stop sign other than to hopefully or somewhat try to control speeds. Back to 5th and 9th Street. 5th Street, we believe, will be opened up next week, 5th and St. Joe, so that corridor will be back to a full corridor. Hopefully that'll take some of the pressure off of people choosing alternate routes for Mount Rushmore Road. And then 9th Street as well, I believe, will be wrapped up in mid-June. Once again, there's another parallel corridor to Mount Rushmore Road and West Boulevard that's been under construction, and getting it back to full functionality will certainly improve the traffic flow in that neighborhood. We've been talking about traffic control and traffic on Mount Rushmore Road and West Boulevard for the last 3-4 years in anticipation of the Mount Rushmore Road project. We all recognize that there's going to be impacts to other streets. It's no different than West Boulevard. When West Boulevard was reconstructed, certainly people had to take alternate routes to get to different places. We don't encourage people to use West Boulevard, but there are no detours that are currently directing people there. It is a public road, and people can choose to take public roads as they see fit. We've done some traffic counts recently. I don't know that I've got the numbers in front of me. Traffic has gone up. We anticipate that when all the construction finished, that'll return to normal. And in fact, the last phase of the Mount Rushmore Road project, the city will also be reconstructing St. Patrick Street west of Mount Rushmore Road. So that'll make West Boulevard even less attractive to anybody trying to use it as a bypass. So I think the way the construction phasing is set up will put a nice period on the end of construction, and will discourage people from using West Boulevard as an alternate route. I may have digressed a little bit there, Alderman Estes, but I hope that answered your question.
Well, I appreciate I think trying to get all the information out here as we can is good. Officer Rood, you probably didn't come prepared to talk about this, but do you have anything you could share with I see there's the trailer with the flashing speed. Is there anything you could share with us as to whether or not that's helped or not?
Well, I don't have any data from the speed trailer, and the speed trailer is generally put up by the traffic department, city street department at our request, but I'm not aware of the speed, results of the speed trailer. I can tell you this, that West Boulevard is that area, that neighborhood. I'd include 9th Street as well. It was one that we've been keeping an eye on since the construction. Just this year alone, we've done more than 100 traffic stops in that area. And we've handled another 100 or so officer-initiated calls for service in terms of subject stops or motorist assists or a variety of other issues as well. So it's not something that we've neglected, but we have an entire city to manage as well. We're concerned about the increase in traffic as well. Public safety is our concern, but we're more than willing to help out in any efforts that either the West Boulevard Homeowners Association has or the Public Works has.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield.
Thank you. Do we have any further discussion, questions, or a motion on this item number 13? I have a motion to acknowledge by Wright, a second by Weifenbach. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion 13, or item number 13 has been acknowledged. Item number 14 is to discuss a warp on Dias Avenue. Bill Freitag.
Bill Freitag, 3821 Brook. Would you rather do 15 and let me back up to 16, 14, and 16?
Let's take 14 first. We'll take them in the order that they are on the amended agenda, if you don't mind. So we'll do 14 first, sir.
Okay, I sent you all an email, except I think I screwed up and didn't send one to Jerry. And in that email, it showed the layout plan for a Dias Avenue proposed subdivision. And on that plan, you would have it. It's in your emails if you wanted to look at it. There's 904 feet of frontage along Dias Avenue, and that 904 feet triggers the need for me as the developer to construct half of that arterial road. I've checked with the cost, the most current costs on the south part of Dias that is just now under construction, and I had Michelle in engineering help me come up with a cost. And so I would estimate my cost on that is about $400,000 to $500,000, and I cannot build that $400,000 or $500,000 into the 30 acres that I'm developing. The engineering had me provide a legal description for 70 acres, but then as we studied the roads further, we found out there's another arterial on the west side. So you can't do the entire 70 acres into this warp for Dias because you're going to have part of it warped for whatever the name of that other road would be on the west edge. So it's probably a 40 acre, 30 acre split because there's already 10 acres up front that borders me that would be included so it would be a 40-40. So I'm not trying to dodge any responsibility to build a road or anything, but to get a waiver, not a waiver, but a exception not to put in the road, the curb gutter, and all of that, I'm required to provide the city with a warp. And that's something I cannot do. I can't provide a warp for these 30, for the people that I'm going to sell property to on this 30 acres, because I can't have them surprised sometime down the road that, hey, you know, I obligated you to a $10,000 to $30,000, just depending on lot size, cost here. And if I tell them that I've obligated them to $10,000 to $30,000 and they need to be aware of it, can you imagine how many sales I'm going to get? It's going to hinder my sales or it's going to totally crash my sales. And if I thought the warp had value, maybe I would not be so intent on not signing this warp. But in my opinion, these warps don't have any value. And in this instance, the warp only applies to an assessed road project. So and the city, according to Dale Tech, and Joel's commented on it also, rarely does assess projects. So this is a warp that's going to create a cloud on a title that John Roberts has testified as a realtor, delays closings up to 3 months. But that's if you can get to closing. First of all, you got to get the guy to agree to it. And I don't think that's possible. And Joel has further said that these warps serve primarily only as notification because it's questionable whether or not a person can actually waive their right to protest. So if we were going to look at it purely as notification, in an assessed project, there is notification, stricter notification than this warp by far, that's included in an assessed project by law. So I don't think notification makes any difference. I would, if there's no other way out of this other than a warp, then I need to stop spending money on engineering and just back away from this project. If there's some other alternatives, I'm willing to negotiate them, but the first one's got to be that I don't sign a warp. Now, if they don't want to grant me the exception and we have to have a hearing on that, that's fine. I'll go through that at that time. My whole point today is I do not want to sign a warp. I can't do that in good conscience to anybody that is going to buy from me. So that's my I think what I'd like to do is, I don't know if Jerry's seen that video I clipped. I don't know if Joel's seen it or Dale's seen it. So if we could play that video, it's 2 minutes and 40 seconds. So you can see what I'm talking about here.
You can't even protest a water line. You can only protest a street improvement.
But if you're never going to do an assessed project, there's no, the warp is ineffective.
But like Dale said, how often do we do an assessed project? Hardly ever. Even with the warp, I don't think we could prevent somebody from coming in here and saying to you, all of you, I don't want you to do this project. That starts to become a freedom of speech issue. The only reason we even do the warps anymore is to just put people on notice that they're starting to sell the property and looking at the title work, and somebody says, well, what is this? And
then it takes 3 months to close on that property. And then it takes 3 months to close on that property.
even with the warp, I don't think we could prevent somebody from coming in here and saying to you, all of you, I don't want you to do this project.
But if you're never going to do an assessed project, there's no, the warp is ineffective. So if you,
but like Dale said, how often do we do an assessed project? Hardly ever.
Hello, you two.
So I'd answer some questions if you have any questions, otherwise I'll just sit down.
Thank you, Mr. Freitag. Have you considered video production instead of developing?
Yeah. Do you want me to do one for you, Charity? I could
Thank
do that.
you. I've seen your handiwork, sir. Mr. Estes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I ask Mr. Tech a question?
Yes, sir.
Dale, I've got a question. So if a person brings in a plat and you require a warp and they assign the warp, so is every parcel, is the legal description, if the plat's 70 acres but only, it's 900 foot of frontage, so if you have 70 acres and there's 900 foot of frontage, it's pretty deep from the road. So then if you sign a warp, all 70 acres on that legal description, then if you end up doing an assessed project, get invited to the party to pay, is that correct?
That's correct.
If there is no warp, let's say we never did a warp and all this is developed, it doesn't matter where we're at, and we do an assessed project. Who gets invited to pay for that? Just the first property owner deep along the road?
Be the people that immediately adjoin the property, so yes, it'd be the people right up against
Just the people that front.
road. Yep.
Madam Chair, may I ask our city attorney,
Please do,
Landine.
Mr. Landine.
Mr. Landine, I asked you the
I think we
same
better
question.
have some discussions internally. I mean, look, whether or not, take out the waiver of right to protest, when you're talking an assessed project, you have to benefit from the project or show a special benefit. So usually, traditionally, yeah, that's the properties that directly front the improvement. But in arterial street, I think we'd probably have a protest from those people that you're expanding this to 5 lanes not to benefit me, but to benefit everybody else. I think this highlights an issue we have with how we build arterial streets, and it's a bigger discussion about how we build arterial streets. You know, there's things about this that are concerning. You know, in Mr. Freitag's case, he's got a property he's looking at that fronts a 2-lane, probably not in great condition county road, but it'll get him access to the property he's developing. If there was no road there, or if it was gravel, what we would do is we would make him pay for the base value of the collector street, and then we would pay his oversized, you know, the additional lanes to build it out the way it needs to be built out. But because it's not connected to a 5-lane facility, he's not going to be required to build it to arterial standards. So he's going to get an exception. And as he talked about, the council, and in my opinion, to make itself feel better and that we're doing something, has done these waiver of right to protest. The comments that I was making in the video were specifically related to water. And like, I've seen the council spontaneously try to do a waiver of right to protest on sidewalks and things. Other than a street improvement, there is no right to protest. And it kind of got mixed up in my comments, but there's 2 kinds of protest, okay? There's the legal protest, and then there's coming in and talking to your council members and saying, we don't think you should do this project. The protest, when you sign a waiver of right to protest that you're really talking about, is that if the city is going to do an assessed street project and you notify all the landowners and they come in and they complain and they say, we don't want you to do it, but despite of that, you do it anyway, they can provide you written protest by, if it's signed by 55% of the landowners along the improvement, that legally stops the project. You can't proceed with it whether you want to or not. Now, and again, that only applies to street improvements. It doesn't apply to water or sewer or sidewalks or any other improvements we do. What I was seeing is, just because you've signed a waiver of right to protest doesn't prevent you from, when you notify them that you're doing an assessed project and you're trying to make that initial decision, from coming in and saying to you as their elected officials, we don't think you should do this street project. That's different than the legal protest. So where it would be a benefit to us potentially is if it was a street improvement and you had the waiver of right to protest, you notified them, they came in, they complained, said, we don't want you to do this. You chose to do it anyway, and they submitted the written protest, the formal protest that could block the project, and some of those, to get to the 55%, had signed a waiver of right to protest. I would say those were invalid in that it would affect the ability of them to legally stop that project. Now, that's the legal aspect of it. There's also a practical aspect of it, which is what Mr. Tack and I were talking about. If you're not going to do an assessed project, then the waiver of right to protest really doesn't have a lot of benefit anyway. And where you're going to be in a tough position, or a future council is, so at this point, you don't want to make Mr. Freitag or a developer in a similar situation expand to a 5-lane facility where he's going to have a 5-lane facility in front of his property and there's going to be a 2-lane facility on each end of it. So you grant his exception request to not build curb and gutter and sidewalk and build that 5-lane facility because it doesn't make sense to build it now. He enters that waiver of right to protest, let's say, because traditionally to get that exemption, he's correct. Staff will say, well, a stipulation of approval for this plat and that exception request is that he agreed to a waiver of right to protest. Now, 10 years from now, we decide Dias Avenue needs to be expanded to a 5-lane facility. And Mr. Freitag has sold all the lots. Developer is nowhere in the picture anymore. And you've got these homeowners who've bought lots in there. Are you really going to go assess them for their share of the cost of that 5-lane facility? Probably not. So then the city builds it at 100% city expense. Now, where this also gets complicated is a developer, and I'll use, for example, the extension of Minnesota Street we just did. There's a gravel road accessing that property. When the person adjacent to it is developing and is platting, we required them to build a 5-lane facility. Now, we are paying for the extra lanes as an oversized cost. But I could see a potential where you're clearly saying to Mr. Freitag, yes, you're off the hook for this arterial street completely, whereas in other situations, we're requiring him to pay the base value. So you could be creating a potential issue, and you may have already created it because I'm not sure the effectiveness of the waiver of right to protest, but where future developers are coming in and saying, well, Mr. Freitag didn't have to pay for the 5-lane facility. Why should we pay for the 5-lane facility? I don't know how that affects this one or how it should affect it because, again, you go back to the basic, which is, should we require him to build a 5-lane facility when it's going to have a 2-lane facility on each end of it? Probably not. But that's where I'm saying we probably need to look at how we're doing arterial streets and how we're paying for them, and maybe we need to consider that in the future. I personally have some issues, obviously, and question the validity of waiver of right to protest, and always have, except for in street projects. But even in street projects, when you can look at it and say, even though this may legally have some effect, practically, I don't think the council's going to do it. But adding documents to the chain of title that potentially gum up the chain of title when they really, I don't know that they serve a real legal purpose if we're not doing assessed projects and we're not going down that road. I don't know what purpose it serves. One final thing I'll say about this request and the next one is that this is an unusual in that usually this would come up as part of a plat discussion, and it would have been a stipulation for approval of the plat, and then Mr. Freitag as the developer would say, I disagree with the stipulation of approval, and you would review it and do it and address it as part of that plat. Now, he'll, I'm sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the reason we're having this discussion now, and he kind of alluded to it, is if you're going to insist on the waiver of right to protest, he doesn't want to invest the money in engineering plans and everything else and go through the submittal process and have that argument at that time. Now, whether you want to address this now or not, that is up to you, but I just would point out this is unusual, and the way this is being brought up is outside the process as it's normally handled in.
Thank you, Joel. Mr. Estes?
Thank you. I guess that, of course, my next comment here is probably more for the next agenda item we added is that normally when we do this, it's an appeal for a decision made by the engineering department or somebody through the planning process, and we're just jumping right. I had a conversation with Bill, and I said, right now it's just advertised as a discussion, and it's kind of like, and I won't argue. I mean, we're all, I think, waiting for the mayor's report on second floor and flow and things, and there maybe things need to change, but right now it just seems like we've just maybe opened up a section to our agenda where people could come in and see which way the wind's blowing. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Mr. Freitag, but it's just kind of like we're pre-approving something that hasn't even been through the entire process. And I totally get trying to save money, but I got a little bit of problem is the discussion's one thing, taking an action when everything hasn't been properly, in my mind, when we want to talk about transparent government, put on the agenda attachments so the public knows what we're being asked to discuss here entirely. So I'll yield. I assume as far as the discussion point, it'll just be acknowledged and the real meat will be on item 16. I yield. Thanks.
Thank you, and I'll just remind the committee members that we do have two separate. This is more of the concept of WARP itself, and then item number 16 will be the specific one on Dias Avenue. Mr. Wright, please.
You're right, Bill. I didn't see this till about 11:30 this morning. That's not a problem, except I didn't get a chance to study it. I've been kind of waiting for this to happen, in a way. This particular area of our community that's been growing leaps and bounds, I just look at the complexity of it, from Seeger to Elkville to Dias to Eglin, Mall Ridge, all different major 4 or 5 lane streets that have been built through multiple sources of funding, from TIFs to WARPs, well, not WARPs, urban systems, CIP, developers have put money, we've spent drainage money, water and sewer. And I think that if my memory is correct, we've used a combination of those fundings to get where we are. And I don't have an answer right now, other than I've seen that we're trying to put some things together out there that need to be done, should be done, and should be done right. And we really don't have good mechanisms for doing it. That's what bothers me. All those are tools that have been used, but I think they're kind of disjointed. We have some funding that helps someone else, which is great, but we don't have it available for maybe this, I don't know. I think we need to look back at this and say, what can we do as a community to make these things happen that are manageable and fundable and doable. I'm just going to leave it at that, and I've already spoken, so I can't make a motion, but thank you.
Mr. Roberts, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I direct a question to Dale Tech?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Tech, when was the last time, and hopefully before Monday night, maybe we can have a list of assessed road projects that Rapid City has done in the last, I don't know, 20 years?
That's going to take some time to put together. I don't think we can have anything by Monday night. I'll give you a history lesson like Mr. Wright likes to do from time to time, but in the 1950s, 60s, and I think even into the early 1970s, that's how streets were built in Rapid City. The developers didn't build them. The city did, and then they assessed them to all the adjoining property owners. Somewhere along the line, the city got away from that model and started making it, if you're developing, you've got to make the improvements, so on and so forth. So I don't know that we've done many, if any, assessed street projects in the last 20 years. I know we've done assessed utility projects in that time frame.
Yes, I can remember the sewer project up on, what was it, Columbus, or the one that got very expensive. I guess my question is on this is, you know, we see these projects done like Seeger Drive, where, you know, we come in and we build a new road, which benefits all the businesses out there, highly benefits businesses out here. And then we put a warp on someone like Mr. Freytag, which causes a lot of possible financial problems and a lot of clouds. It's not necessarily that it's going to happen. It's the possibility that it's going to happen, and it's putting all these people on notice that may or may not be buying out there. I know that there was another possible project out in the same location that came in, and there were some difficulties because of what their perception of what they thought they were going to spend to do the project. And I know that Rapid City is turning away a lot of business because of these different issues that we have with planning, and we need to, as a community, as a council, we need to figure out how to take care of these issues so Rapid City can grow more. So anyway, thank you, Dale, and if you put that together, or even 10 years, you know, the last 10 years would be great. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Reminder, we still have no motion on the floor. Mr. Weifenbach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think that this conversation is not premature. I think that this is an important time in the process. If you got a guy who's going to put his money in a development, he already knows up front that they're going to require a warp, which I would bet dollars to donuts, and I guess I'll ask the question without knowing the answer. If WL Plastics or Wausau has a warp. They're on the other side of his property. I guess I'll ask the question.
Mr. Tech, do you know off the top of your head?
Those properties were not platted. They were all sold in excess of 40 acres, so none of the platting requirements kicked in on that. Therefore, there was no warps required on those properties.
Okay. So the broader overall question here is, I think someone alluded to it, is I hate to admit the fact that sometimes when our city attorney has been telling us this all along, I don't think that it's been coming to me. I haven't gotten it. And I finally, after watching the video and doing some research, I finally get what he's saying. Is if the city council decides to make an assess a road, whether it's on Mr. Freitag's development that he's thinking about, or if it's another road in the city, they have a legal right and a council right to protest. And by telling somebody that we're going to give you a waiver of right to protest, we're saying, well, it may not be you, but it may be somebody down the future. We're trying to take that right away. That's not what I'm interested in doing at all. I have no interest in it. I can't support any warps moving forward in this context, other than, like you said, the sidewalk ones, because we make special remedies for specific developments and those types of things to put a sidewalk in. But I think if we're listening to our legal counsel, the fact of the matter is that this is going to be a huge issue. And Mr. Freitag, obviously, your position here is to get rid of this warp, right? It has nothing to do with the overall picture or not doing the road or whatever. Is that correct?
That's correct. And what Brad Estes said is only about half correct, and it's not Brad's fault that his question's half correct. I made a written request to engineering to give me a document, which I sent to all of you, that said that they were going to require a warp, and it didn't get put on the agenda. Now, that isn't my fault that didn't get linked to the agenda. But Dale took, you know how busy he is, but he took the time to send me the letter, and Ted Johnson is who I turned my stuff into. So to say, now we can't do anything because there's a little hiccup here, the hiccup is not on me. The other thing, and I'm glad you pointed it out, is that there are no warps on Dias Avenue except for the one right next door to me, which would be part of that 40 acres, what I was originally talking about, where the assessment would have to go, and my 30 acres. So, and then also you got to understand what Joel's saying here is that 5 lanes and so on. I don't care if it's 1 lane, 5. It's $400,000 to $500,000. That's the number, and I can't build it in. I can't add it to the real estate and recoup it, and I don't want to obligate somebody into the future. The other thing you got to be real clear on here is you're not approving anything. If I still have to make a formal request to be exempt from all these things. I haven't done it yet. I'm only addressing the warp. So if I make that and you don't like any of that, you don't have to approve anything. You can say, no, Freitag, you got to go build the road right now. That's what you're obligated to do. And so if you do that, good, I'm done. I'm out of here and your issue is gone. But I can't keep spending thousands of dollars on engineering for something as simple as this. And I was real clear up front with engineering why I had to know what your opinion was of me signing a warp. So it can't, you can't have it both ways here, but you can, and actually this is more item 16 discussion than 14, but you're not risking anything by giving me the right not to sign a warp. You're not risking nothing. And the other thing Joel said was really important is we got to find some other ways to do this. Well, I got other ideas on how to do these. So we could start having that discussion, and I'll bet you if I brought those ideas to you at the time that I was saying I want my exceptions, but this is the way I'm going to take care of the road instead of with a warp, you would probably agree with me. But we got to get to that point first, and I can't get there if it's all up in the air and I don't know how much more thousands of dollars I'm going to spend, and then all of a sudden you're going to say, nah, everybody else signed to warp, you're going to sign to warp, because that's the deal breaker. I'm done. I'm not pretending. If it comes down to a warp, I just pull away from the project. So I would hope that I get to speak again on number 16. Thank you.
We'll probably get to number 16 tonight. And I wanted to make sure about the one thing that the council has to understand, one thing I learned is platting versus building permits are two different things. So once you plat down from 40 this is a whole other conversation, guys. I think Brad Estes had alluded to it earlier, talking about the 1 mile, the 3 mile, or actually the 3 mile inside Rapid City and the 3 mile when we're talking about platting versus building permits. It's a whole another can of worms. That road out there probably may not be built for the next 10 or 15 or 20 years, maybe, if that. The project, that Seeger project, has not been assessed. That was done by the city. This is a major arterial. It's not like an interior road, which, is being built by the developers. So I'll yield to my colleagues.
Thank you, Ron. We'll go to Mr. Estes.
I'll make a motion to acknowledge, I'd like to keep the floor.
A motion by Estes, second by Roberts to acknowledge this discussion, and Mr. Estes, you have the floor.
Yeah, I think now's the time to have the discussion. I just, the problem I have with the tools we have in our toolbox right now is that we get with the TIFs and stuff, we get to arbitrarily pick the winners and losers in the development world, in my mind. And I just hate, I don't like that. I think we need to come up with an idea whether we bond and we go out and put these roads in, and you pick a huge area that's impacted and invite everybody to the party that way. But globally, for me, this system is broke.
But this road's not even triggered to go in.
Mr. Wright.
I just want to second. I withdraw, thank you.
Okay. No one else in the queue. I do have a motion on the floor to acknowledge. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion to acknowledge carries. We're now on to item number 15. Item 15 is to deny, per staff recommendation, the request from Forefront Design, Inc. for Back Porch South SD LLC for variance to waive the requirement to install sidewalk per city ordinance 12.08.060 along North Elkvale Road. Mr. Roberts.
Thank you very much. I found this one quite interesting when I was looking through it and looking at the maps, and I really have an issue with us putting sidewalks on Elkvale Road. I think because of the traffic and the speed of the traffic, it's a very poor place to put sidewalks. Now, if we could work with all the property owners and maybe move back and put a bike path, that would be different in my mind. But just putting sidewalks along the frontage of a road that's 50, 55 miles an hour, I worry about the safety concerns. So I am going to think about this before I make a motion or listen to whatever motion someone else may make. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. I see no other lights.
There's something here we don't know.
I have no motion on the floor. Thank you, Mr. Weifenbach.
Madam Chair, I'll make the recommendation, move to council without recommendation, give me the further time to.
Okay, I have a motion by Weifenbach, second by Roberts, to roll this to council without recommendation at this point for further study. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item number 16, again from Bill Freitag, to waive the warp requirement on Dias Avenue. Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I ask a question of our City Attorney, Joe Landine?
Please do.
Mr. Landine, I'm kind of piggybacking off of what Brad said at the end of the last one about picking winners and picking losers. And I think, in my opinion, what we need to do, and this is going to take a lot more discussion, but in my opinion, we need to just eliminate the warp from from roads if we're not going to do assessed projects. And from sewer, even though I'm a little disappointed now because when I went back to the May 18th, I believe, council meeting of last year, when I recommended a warp on a water line, and I wasn't listening to Mr. Landine when Mr. Landine said that we really don't do warps on water lines, but it was recommended by the engineering department. So I think we need to, well, maybe it wasn't, I don't know, I didn't, but we need to have a long discussion on this. But I think what I wanted to ask, the question I'm trying to ask is, we as a council have the right, and the city staff has the right, to do an assessed project anytime we want to, with or without a warp, correct?
You are not, the warp is not the document that gives you the right. You have a statutory ability to do an assessed road project. And with a road project, however, the adjoining landowners have the ability to protest that formally and put an end to it.
So I guess my question is let's say I'm not even going to use Mr. Freitag, but somebody else, some developer comes in, puts a warp on a piece of property. They sign that warp. 20 years later, we decide to do an assessed project. Developer's been dead for 10 years. Nobody that has the property now knows that there's a warp on that. We come in and assess them. Do they have the right to protest at that time?
Not if there's a waiver of right to protest, because it's filed as a covenant, so it's in their chain of title, so they should have been made aware of it when they purchased the property.
Okay. And that's one of the things that I was trying to point out is this goes with that property forever and ever and ever. And if we aren't doing assessed projects, if we haven't done an assessed project in 10, 20, 30 years on a road, what is the use of this other than being a deterrent for development? So anyway, thank you very much.
So I think the question on the floor really is, there's going to be this section of road in front of Mr. Freitag's property that he is being asked to build to 5 lanes, or half of 5 lanes, and does it make sense to make him do that right now when the rest of Dias Avenue is not that? Mr. Landine?
That is not the question in front of you.
For item
The question,
16,
and Mr.
waiver for
Freitag
what?
acknowledged that, he will still have to, as part of his development and his subdivision process, file a request for an exception to not build that to 5 lanes. What he has recognized is that traditionally staff, because there isn't 5-lane facility adjacent to it, is going to probably approve or recommend approval of that exception. And one of the stipulations for approving that exception is going to be the waiver of right to protest. At this point, what he said today is he's not asking you to approve the exception to the subdivision requirements. He's just asking that when you consider that it be clear that a stipulation for an approval of that exception is not a waiver of right to protest. Is that?
Thank you, and I wasn't done with what I was saying,
Okay.
but thank you for waving your hand wildly. Yeah, we're on the same page. So we still have no motion on the floor. Mr. Weifenbach.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and that would be my motion, is that we do not have this as a stipulation for the exception of this project, that there be a warp sign. Does that make sense to our legal counsel?
Yeah.
Okay, I do have a motion and a second.
The motion is to not have this as a requirement for the exception that Mr. Freitag needs, that there will be no warp required in that exception, that be waived. We're not approving the exception, we're just waiving.
Striking that as being one of the exception criteria.
The warp is not an option, yeah.
That's okay with the seconder?
And thank you, and if I could just hold the floor for a minute.
Yes.
And I agree with Mr. Esses, and I've had this discussion with my colleagues on several occasions of us picking winners and losers. Do TIFs, don't do TIFs, do this, do that. These are artillery roads. the cost factor is extreme. And this particular road has one person on one side that may have to pay for their half of this road, the other person on the other side not paying for their side of the road. But that's a whole bigger, broader conversation. And I think I would leave that for another time, but I don't want to leave it off the table. But I want Mr. Estes to know that I acknowledge exactly what he's saying. I'm not in the business to pick winners and losers. I'm in the business to do the business for the taxpayers. And so, thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Any further discussion? Mr. Estes.
Thank you. You know, Mr. Freitag made a comment that I was half right today. That's probably the nicest thing he's ever said to me or about me. But this is going to go to council. But right now I'm going to vote no, because no matter whose fault, to me, we're taking an action that didn't. Right now, I'll think about it between now and Monday, but didn't get properly noted. I mean, this was under special items from the public. It didn't come from engineering. I just think and I think that, and the person might not show up, but the person to the north did sign a warp, and they might have an opinion, and I might end up voting for this on Monday, but I just feel it should have been. I mean, I think we're all in favor of open and transparent government and wanting the public to know what we're going to talk about and what we're going to decide. And I fully agree this is it's not too early to have the discussion, but I'm not so sure that I feel that we're on solid ground to make a decision. Thanks.
Thank you, and I will just remind you that this is a recommending body to the council. Mr. Wright.
I just want to say again that it's high time we have the discussion on how we're going to pay for our oversized and extras infrastructure that we're not properly funded for. And I think we need to have that discussion ASAP, as soon as possible. Because without the means to do that on an unlimited basis, we're going to have to say we can only do so much or we can't do it. Our toolbox, as we say, is commonly referred to as the TIF or sales tax. I just think our hands are tied, and we need to have a discussion what we want to do in the future, how we're going to handle it. Thank you.
Mr. Weifenbach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was almost done talking, and then Mr. Estes brought up the fellow to the north. The fellow to the north has no idea that he has a warp. He is in the middle of trying to figure out his property right now with the city and how his property got brought into the city and the convoluted process that took place between him purchasing it and so we've been working on that for, I would refer to Mr. Roberts on that, but that's it. Yeah.
Mr. Roberts.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the person to the north there has got some very serious issues we've been working on for a few months now. And one of his issues was he was annexed into the county after he made a purchase order on the home and 2 days before he closed on the home. So he's got some real big issues going on out there. But this is the first that I've ever heard that he signed a warp, or that the former owner signed a warp. I knew that there was some other things going on, but yeah, Mr. Freitag may be able to explain a little bit more.
Well, that part's really not germane to this item.
Well, that's
right. It does, though. It answers John's question, and that John asked me to take a look at that guy's property. I informed him he signed a warp, so he does know. And I've been helping John help this kid get his stuff straightened out. I've got his parking lot designed now, and he only has one more issue, one more hill to climb, and then we can get his stuff all straightened out. So he is aware that he did sign a warp. I told him.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank
I didn't realize that.
But the item on the floor is the motion on the floor is to waive the warp for Mr. Freitag today. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign?
No.
Motion does carry. I would look for a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Weifenbach, second by Roberts. All in favor? All opposed, same sign? I guess we're going to sit here for a while.